All right, since we're still not seeing her show up on the screen as available, maybe we could at least start the process of nominating a temporary chair to take over chairing duties until she is able to join us, at which time she would resume chairing the meeting. I'll go ahead and kick it off. Are there any nominations from the floor for a temporary chair?
Nominate Bob.
Pardon? Oh,
I'll second that, Musgrove.
Francesca, would you mind just doing a quick vote for us, just to confirm it?
Sure, thank you. Board Member Musgrove.
Aye.
Public Member Agnes Wong Nickerson.
Yes.
Public Member Stuart Halper. Stuart, I'm sorry if you stated your vote, I wasn't able to hear it.
Yes.
Thank you very much. And Public Member Bob Monson.
yes.
Thank you very much. And that does pass unanimously with those members present.
All right, Mr. Monson, now that we've put you on the spot to chair the meeting, happy to assist you in any way that I can.
Okay, thank you.
The
Amber
seat's
Lynn.
warming up a little bit, Bob, isn't it?
Thanks a lot, Stuart.
I just wanted to see history being made, because there's been years of this agency doing everything possible to prevent a public member from chairing a meeting. So I just thought it would be fun to make history today.
I'll do my best. Do my best. Amber Lynn, should we get started or should we go ahead and wait?
If we could wait just a moment, we
Okay.
do have a translator who is on the line as part of our pledge to provide translation services at all of our public meetings. So if we could just give her a brief opportunity to make an announcement about how to access the translation services, and then we can get started with item number 1.
Okay.
Hi, Amberlyn. This is Andrew at Translating. The interpretation service started. I put those instructions up on the screen, and it is already all set. So you guys are good to go. I can give the audio version if you want, because she's already accepted the designation. Would you like me to?
Yes, please.
No problem. I will repeat this message in English below. Este es un aviso por parte del intérprete. Para usar uso del servicio de interpretación, favor de desplazarse a la parte inferior de la pantalla de Zoom, donde aparecen los controles. Haga clic en el icono de interpretación, el globo terráqueo, y seleccione Spanish, español. Si está utilizando la aplicación móvil de Zoom, celular, tableta, etc., presione los puntos suspensivos, luego Interpretation y luego el idioma. This is an announcement on behalf of the interpreter. To use the Zoom interpretation feature, please scroll to the bottom of the Zoom screen where the meeting controls are. Click on the interpretation icon, the world icon, and select English or Spanish. If you're using the Zoom mobile app on a cell phone, tablet, etc., please press the ellipsis, then interpretation, and then choose your language. Thank you.
Okay. I guess we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I'll go ahead and do it. So everybody's ready. Here we go. I pledge allegiance to the flag, the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, and with liberty and justice for all. And let me see. I think the first thing on the agenda is approval of the meeting minutes from January 28th. And I can entertain a motion and a second.
I'll move to approve.
Musgrove will
Okay.
second.
All right. Looks like that's been approved. Any public comments?
Thank you, Chair. I do not see any hands from the public on this item.
Okay. Do we have any member comments? And not seeing any. We'll move on to the next item, the agency report.
Chair, I'm so sorry to stop you. We do need to take a tally vote for that item.
I'm sorry, I'm moving too fast.
No problem. Okay, I will go ahead and with the tally vote for item 1. Board Member Musgrove.
Yes.
Thank you. Public Member Agnes Wong Nickerson,
Yes.
Public Member Stuart Halper,
Yes.
and Public Member Bob Monson.
Yes.
Thank you, and that passes unanimously. I'm sorry, I'm going too fast for the production team, as per usual. We give them a moment on the voting. And for the record, Chair Zito and Board Member Vasquez are both absent, but that does pass with those members present.
All right. Thank you, Francesca. So now it's on to the agency report. I'm not sure who's giving that.
That is Hassan.
Okay, and Asan is not here. Or is he in a? Is he
Mr.
here?
Monson, if I could just ask you to back up to the public comment item, which is item number 2, so we can give an opportunity for members of the public to comment on non-agenda items.
Oh, okay. Do we have any members of the public that would like to comment?
Thank you. I do see one hand from the public. Catherine Rhodes, you're self-muted at the moment. You can go ahead and begin when you're ready.
Lovely. Thank you so much. And I'm here to request the SANDAG Audit Committee audit the regional housing needs assessment numbers given to you by the City of San Diego, and then which you give to the state. I actually believe the numbers the city gives to you is false. I believe sometimes they double count affordable housing projects one year, and then they will count them again the next year. And, you know, one of the big things that they don't do is they never tell you how many affordable housing units were destroyed. For instance, in 2016, the San Diego Union Tribune said that 10,000 affordable housing units, mostly SROs, were destroyed in downtown between 2000 and 2006. But the numbers the city gave you is like, 10. So there's a big, huge difference between what actually is. And I think the reason for that is the way you ask for the numbers. You kind of ask for the numbers without any type of backup information. So a thing that I think you could say that you could do is when they give you the numbers for how many units that they created for very low, middle income and market rate, if you could have them give you the assessor parcel numbers, the address, the actual completion dates, not just when somebody pulled a permit, that might never ever happen. And so one of the other things that they never talk about, or you never have in your as units destroyed, is those units that are going for short-term vacation rentals. For example, the City of San Diego wants to give up 1% of their housing units, or 5,400 units, to be used for short-term rentals besides Mission Beach. And those numbers are not showing up in your reports that you're giving to the state. So again, I'm just asking, I actually think that this is a big, huge, part of the fraud, where the city thinks that they're actually doing something. In some years, they're actually having a negative effect by, destroying affordable housing units. And so thank you very much. And I hope you guys do an audit of this, so you could give them some, good recommendations of how the problem could be fixed. And so we could actually get.
Thank you, Catherine. Do we have any other public comments?
Thank you, Chair. No, I don't see any other hands from the public.
All right, thank you. Do we have any member comments?
It looks like we have Mayor Vasquez with us.
Okay.
And I'm so very happy to be able to join you. I apologize for the technical difficulties. It was a rough road travel to get here, but guess what? I'm happy that I am here. And thank you so much for taking over the meeting as we move forward. So do we have any member comments? And if not, I do have comments to share today. As
Real
I do
quickly,
not
Mayor,
see, yes.
Amber Lynn, does Bob have to abdicate or relinquish officially?
He does not. He was appointed as a temporary chair until the arrival of our vice chair, who is here now.
Fantastic. Thank you. Welcome, Mayor.
Welcome, Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. And So first of all, I would like to acknowledge what is currently going on in Ukraine. And I hope that everyone involved will be committed to a peaceful resolution. Now, Black History Month is an important opportunity to take a look back at the contributions and achievements of Black Americans who were trailblazers in the accounting profession. In 1921, John Cromwell Jr. became the first African-American certified public accountant. Cromwell graduated from Dartmouth in 1906, and he got his master's degree from the same college in 1907. 15 years later, he became a CPA. However, the road to becoming a CPA was not easy. In fact, he was not allowed to sit for the CPA exam in Washington, D.C., Virginia, or Maryland, because all of those places had experience requirements. And this was the biggest barrier for African Americans. In 1921 in New Hampshire, they passed legislation to stop the experience requirement, which allowed Cromwell the opportunity to travel to the state and take the exam. After becoming a CPA, Cromwell taught high school accounting in the District of Columbia, and he worked almost exclusively within the Black community. Now, in 1930, he became the comptroller for Howard University. And in the early 60s, which is 40 years later, John Cromwell was still the only African-American CPA at our nation's capital. So I just wanted to share that with you as we are near the end of Black History Month. And I encourage you to do a little research and find out more information about his contributions in the field. Now, I have a very important announcement to make regarding the future of the Audit Committee meetings. 2 fiscal years back, the Audit Committee meeting day was changed from the first Friday of each month to the 4th Friday. This action was taken to accommodate Bill Baber as the chair of the Audit Committee, and it's because he had a scheduling conflict. However, this change stretched and continues to stretch the Sandag production team. Currently, the team is supporting the board, and the team is also supporting the Audit Committee and the Borders Committee. And all of those meetings take place on the 4th Friday. Therefore, to help support the production team, beginning in April, we will move the Audit Committee meetings back to the 1st Friday of each month. And this particular move does not require a vote or action, and it will go to the board meeting on March 25th for ratification. So I just wanted to share that with everyone as we move forward with our meeting. Now, I will turn this over to the Executive Director, Asan Akrada, to give the agency report. Asan.
Thank you, Chair, very much. And thank you for sharing the Black History Month as we all celebrate. And also, thank you for talking about Ukraine. I happen to live in Ukraine for about 4 or 5 years. I actually lived in the city that Zaporozhye. The airport was bombed yesterday. It's really sad, and our hearts and prayer goes with the Ukrainian people. But thank you for mentioning that. I appreciate that. A couple of items. I haven't seen you in the last couple of meetings. I don't know whether it's Mary designed it this way or not, but I couldn't be with you in the last couple of meetings. So I'm gonna take a couple of minutes longer just to give you a few things. One is, as I did for the board year in review, we had a great, exciting year last year. We opened the largest infrastructure project in San Diego's history, the Midcoast. I hope many of you were able to join us in the celebration. 8,500 people of our community celebrated with us. The Midcoast is operational, on time, on budget. A month later, the board of directors adopted the 5 big moves, the regional transportation plan. And a week later, they adopted the community-based agreement, is what's known by project labor agreement. Great achievement, but we had a lot of work yet to continue. When we started all of this, we had 5 agency priorities. Obviously, to adopt the plan, to finish the mid-coast, to build a connection to the airport, rail connection with the central mobility hub, to deal with the loss and both the short-term and long-term issues, the loss and corridor. We can check the box on the 2021 regional plan, even though it's not all fully approved yet. Check the box on the mid-coast, and now Otay Mesa 2 rises to the top of the priorities, and so is the airport, and so is Lausanne. Speaking of Otay 2, I am happy to report to you that last week we had a binational meeting attended by our U.S. Ambassador Ken Salazar from and our Lieutenant Governor Elena Konolakis, the Governor of Baja California Maria del Valle, and the Mayor of Tijuana, the Mayor of San Diego, Mayor Gloria, our Chair Blake Spear, Mayor Didina, many of the high-level officials from Mexico. And that was an amazing meeting simply because that was the start of something we've been working so hard to get to. Accordingly, I left to Washington this week on Monday, met with Undersecretary of Homeland Security, the Undersecretary for General Service Administration, the Commissioner for Customs, Juan Gonzalez, the advisor to the White House, had a great lunch with our Mexican ambassador to the US. It is all about making sure Otay Mesa 2 moves forward. And I'm happy to report to you that we're in 2 months, we are gonna put out a request for qualification to start preparing the site for building Otay Mesa 2. I can tell you, and you can hold me to that. This border crossing, probably the most advanced technologically in the world, will open by September 2024. And that would allow us to say the third priority is being checked. Now, we adopted the plan. The plan was submitted to the federal and state governments for approval. I'm happy to report to you that we did receive the approval from Federal Highway Administration on conformity. So we had one down, one to go, and that is the critical one that the Air Resources Board from Sacramento has to certify that our plan have met the greenhouse gas emission reduction. We're working with the Air Resources Board, and we're expecting an answer from them very shortly. Just last thing on Otay Mesa 2, this is an amazing project. It's a binational project. It's a project that talks about economic sustainability and environmental sustainability for the region. It's a project that the kind of infrastructure project that our region needs to move forward. So stay tuned for huge activities in the coming few months. One thing I wanted to let you know about, and that's an important, that you're aware that we have a fraud, waste, and abuse hotline. And last week, our independent auditor, Mary Kay, let me know about an operational error that had come to her attention. This is on the State Route 125. The State Route 125, the toll road that we run, have about 42 stations where we read transponders and people pay accordingly. The contractors that provide these stations is way behind nationwide, but 5 of those stations malfunction. And that malfunction of these 5 continued for about 2.5 months. Therefore, there were a lost revenue. And the estimate range is somewhere between 700 to 2 million, could be a little more, a little less. Mary right now is not ready to, because she has not concluded her investigation, and we're working with her office. The bottom line is this: Senior management staff that no longer with Sandag knew about this, but failed to report it out. I take full responsibility for any screw up like this. First of all, the malfunction is one thing, but for us to have it go for 2 months without knowing about it means we lack some issues. As I told the board this morning, this is why having an independent performance auditor for the agency is so important and so critical. This is why your work is so important, so critical. Because if there is a job to be done, is to make sure there is controls that these things don't happen again. Again, take full responsibility for not telling you about this earlier. I only found about it from our independent auditor. The report is not final. Mary has to finish the report, see what's the final financial impact is. We're definitely gonna go against the contractors. They're liable for certain amounts a day for delays, and I don't think they will dispute that. So we're going to collect that. I don't know how much that will. A lot of information is yet to come, but I wanted you to find out about this from us, not anywhere else. The minute the staff found that there's malfunctions in the equipment, they immediately jump and repair them. And frankly, some of them had to go to eBay to buy parts for such an old equipment we have. The contractors have a nationwide issue. We're dealing with this issue. My commitment to you, and I'm sure Mary will tell you the same thing, we'll make sure, we'll guard against this go for so long without being discovered or reported. Madam Chair, this concludes my report. I'll be more than happy to answer questions.
Thank you so very much. And so I'll check in with Francesca to see if we have any public comments.
Thank you, Chair. I don't see any hands from the public.
Thank you so much. And do we have any member comments? And as I see, we do not have any member comments at this time. I want to, before we go to the next item, I want to make a correction regarding my statement about our meetings. I did mention the move of our meeting from the 4th Friday to the 1st Friday. However, the move is to the 2nd Friday of each month. So please take a note of that. The goal is to move our meetings from the 4th Friday of each month to the 2nd Friday of each month. And now we will hear from our independent performance auditor, Mary Kay. And I'll turn this over to you.
Thank you, Mayor Vasquez. Hello, everybody. I'm going to give you a quick update. We've just completed, and we'll hear the findings today, the purchase card review, audit and review. Mike's going to go over that a little bit later with you. We are now moving into the contracts and procurement audit. This is more around, again, reminder that we're looking at the operational controls, system controls, and the processes and procedures. We had determined to do that this fiscal year, which has really benefited the agency overall. It's really looking at the foundation of the organization and the operational processes rather than looking at it through an audit lens of an audit. We just found that that was really needed at this time. So with that, we'll be looking at the contracts and procurement audit, but we're looking at it from a policy and procedures. Are they following their policies and procedures? Are the policies and procedures adhering to the federal and state, since we receive both federal and state funding around contracts and procurement? Are they consistently following them? You know, are all analysts doing the same things? Do they have procedural manuals and processes in place? And then from a testing standpoint, we will be looking at the contracts on various contracts, and we're really looking at it from an internal perspective as far as, are they following their policies around bidding processes, around scope, around amendments and approval of amendments? And also, how are they doing in regard to when payment invoices come in? Are they requiring sufficient documentation to support the efforts Are the contractors adhering to their commitments around the contracts? And are we on our side, if they're not doing what we're supposed to be doing according to our policies and procedures? So that's really the lens that this audit is being done through. And then we'll move into the next fiscal year where we'll actually do continuous auditing, and we'll actually be testing on more of the contract side, looking if they're paying appropriately. Are they within their scope? Are there too many amendments? Are they within their budget timelines? And that will be more of an outside coming in focus. So that we are getting ready to start. We had our kickoff meeting with management Wednesday, and that will be moving along. I also want to share that I am excited to share that Michael, one of the auditors that I had announced would be leaving us, will be staying with us here at Sandag. We were able to get in cahoots in a good way with management and work it out to where we can keep Mike, and he's definitely worth keeping because he's an awesome auditor. And so we're excited that Mike is staying with us. On another end, we do have an announcement to make that Tofik did leave us. He is moving on and working at his old prior agency. So we'll miss Tofik. He was a great contributor to the P-card audit when he was here with us. So he will be missed. So we do have 2 vacancies still that we need to fill. We do have Brianna, who we hope to bring on as our auditor next fiscal year. She, like Mike, was an intern or is an intern, and we hope to make her an auditor the next fiscal year coming up. So with that, I will close unless there are questions.
Thank you so very much. And so I'll check in with Francesca to see if we have any public comment.
Thank you, Chair. I don't see any hands from the public.
Thank you. And do we have any member comments? And as I do not see any member comments, I'd like to thank you for sharing your report. Moving on to
Mayor Vasquez, it looks like Stuart has his hand up.
Stuart has his hand up. Okay.
Virtual.
1 second.
Here's my real hand.
Oh, okay, got it. Because I was looking for your hand, your actual,
Okay,
you know,
sorry,
on the
I'll do a real
screen kind of
hand.
hand. Okay, so I'll turn this over to Stuart. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chair. You know, I appreciate the personnel update, Mary, and just one question comes to mind, particularly with Asan's comments about the your office helping to uncover the situation he described. Last meeting, we talked about your budget request for the next fiscal year, and you were looking for a modest increase. I'm just wondering if somebody can shed light on, from a process standpoint, are you going to be able to share that presentation that you gave to us with the board to help ensure that the board will support the increase for your budget? Because as I recall, even with the increase, you're still relatively understaffed. And I appreciate Hassan's comments about how important your office is to the agency, and hopefully the rest of the board will agree.
I think at this point, because my request was for, of course, one additional position. And I think Hassan and I had talked and saying if we can get an additional position each fiscal year, that would be helpful to work our way up to where we really need to be. I think we're both in agreement. And so I believe that, and I could be wrong. And Hassan.
No, you're correct. You're correct. I actually would just say, I think there is now more than ever easy to justify why Mary needs another position. And I think there's a process we need to go through in the budget, but we will, like we did last time, we're gonna give her the resources she needs. Because as I said, and I told the board this morning, you might sound, cliche, but having an independent office for an agency like Sandag is so critical that if you think what's the cost of a position, it's nothing compared to what you could avoid later. And I think the board would be there. So Mary, I'm totally there with you.
It's great to hear. Appreciate your support. Thanks. No further questions, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. And as I do not see any additional hands, I'd like to thank you for your report as well, Mary. And so we will now move on to item number 5, which is the salary and compensation audit. Now, this item will be presented in 2 parts by Melissa Kofit and Mary Kay. And so I'll turn this over to the both of you.
Thank you, Mayor Vasquez, and good afternoon, committee members. So we've met before. As you know, I'm Melissa Caulfield. I'm the Director of Organization Effectiveness here at SANDAG, and along with Andre Dujon, our Chief Financial Officer, we'll be providing the 4th progress update on the Compensation Audit Action Plan today. And our report will highlight the actions that management completed between September and December last year. So during the 3 prior progress reports, along with the updates you'll hear today, we hope it's abundantly clear that management has taken the Comp Audit Action Plan seriously. For more than 12 months, we've worked diligently, comprehensively, and collaboratively to address the 27 recommendations that were identified in the audit. And as the responsible executives, Andre, John Kirk, our General Counsel, and myself have brought together a cross-functional team to work through the action plan with members from our finance, payroll, legal, human resources, and risk management teams. Combined with regular check-ins and guidance from Mary, we've introduced significant and important changes to the agency's business practices, all of which are consistent with Asan's direction to adopt a continuous improvement mindset in all aspects of our work. As you scan through attachment 1 to our report, which starts on page 11 of your online agenda package, you'll note that there are 26 fully shaded pink circles, meaning that 26 of the 27 action items have been completed by management, and they've also been reviewed by Mary and her team. There's 1 remaining item, which is currently scheduled to be wrapped up by June 30th. As noted, the focus of our discussion today is on the 11 items completed by December 31st. And the work falls broadly into 3 categories: the policies and procedures for administering compensation, the documentation of practices for maintaining SANDAG salary ranges, the use of employee job titles, as well as documenting our recruitment and selection practices. So at this time, I'd like to invite Andre to share highlights of the work that he and his payroll and finance teams have completed recently. Andre.
Great. Thanks, Melissa, and good afternoon, Mayor Vasquez and committee members. So as you can see here on the screen, there were a total of 11 action items that were completed by the payroll and finance teams in response to the recommendation from the compensation audit. The actions, as noted on the slide, relate to the compensation administration. The first set of actions is we obtained acknowledgements of understanding of severance pay policies and procedures per Board Policy 17, which is the delegation of authority by the CEO, the General Counsel, and Manager of Human Resources. These acknowledgements tie back to the policy updates that the board adopted in June of 2021. There were also recommendations from the comp audit that we strengthen policies related to severance pay and ensure the appropriate staff understand the requirements. And so if you look at attachment 2 to this report, we have acknowledgements from Asan, John, and Rachel, who are obviously our current CEO, General Counsel, and HR manager. The next set of action is the development and formalized procedures for reconciling the board-approved annual compensation adjustments to the amounts awarded to employees. These actions are related to the findings from the audit that the cost of compensation adjustments provided to employees were not consistent with the amounts approved by the board as part of the budget. So HR and payroll have increased sharing when processing pay increases, and a full reconciliation is completed to demonstrate consistency with approved budget. And attachment 3 further describes this procedure. The final review and approval comes to the CFO, which is me. And this procedure we've actually completed twice over the last several months based on the 2 board approvals that were done. And as further evidence, we have sent those reconciliations to Mary Kay. The next set of actions, the improved overall payroll related processes and procedures, including allocating lump sum merit pay and reporting special compensation. In general, these actions address findings from the audit about need for additional clarity about procedures, including documentation of the various practices used by payroll for the administration and processing of the comp adjustments. Now, these are also in attachments 4 to 6 of this report. We also confirmed that we're properly recording these transactions with our independent outside auditors, Crow LLP, and there's also further documentation on that to attachment 7 of this report. The last action item was the obtain acknowledgements from employees with payroll functions that they are reviewed and understand their roles and responsibilities relative to their job functions. And again, this action supports the improved documentation of processes and procedures to ensure awareness and understanding by the finance team members. And a sample of these acknowledgements is attached to attachment 8 of this report. So, before I turn it back to Melissa, I really want to recognize the hard work by both the HR teams led by Rachel and the payroll teams led by Heather, who took OIPA's recommendations very seriously. And through their collaboration, we really accomplished the goal of documenting these important procedures. So with that, I'll turn it back to Melissa.
Great, thank you, Andre. And just to round out or wrap up our presentation on the work that we completed by December 31st, just wanted to highlight 3 of the items that were led by the human resources team, by Rachel and her team. So just scrolling through these for you, part of action or responding to the recommendation for action 7.1, the HR team documented the established practices that SANDAG uses for maintaining our salary ranges. And this includes the efforts that we undertake to engage our compensation consultant to perform market salary range studies on a regular basis, typically every 2 to 3 years. In those years between the salary range studies, we continue to work with our compensation consultants to gather information about shifts in the market and any recommendations that we might want to recommend to the board for maintaining the salary ranges between those formal studies. So the policy and the procedure guide that we follow here is attachment 9 in your agenda package, which also describes the involvement of senior management as well as the responsibility of the board to approve the position classification and salary range table annually, along with the record keeping responsibilities that the HR manager undertakes related to this work. Then moving to action 8.1, where we had made a commitment to ensure we consistently used employee names and classification titles through all of the formal agency systems and records. So we started by preparing a policy to set expectations, engaged with our partner teams throughout the organization to have their support in this maintenance activity. And one of the ways that we ensure the ongoing communication of that expectation and commitment is through the use of an acknowledgement form with our partner managers, again, throughout the organization. And then the last of the items that I was going to touch on for you is action 9.3. And this is work that the human resources team did to fully document the longstanding practices that the agency has used in our recruitment and selection of individuals for job openings. Now, this work is summarized in attachment 12 that was included in your report today. And I think I would just add to this item Having served as the HR manager, the personnel officer for the agency, and currently in my role as the agency's Equal Employment Opportunity Program Officer, I am really confident that our recruitment and selection methods are fair, equitable, reasonable, and result in defensible decisions that management may take as they are hiring individuals for the agency. That said, as we look to the future, the team will continue to research and implement new and best practices that are responsive to market conditions and continue to attract and retain individuals that the agency needs for our work program. So just in wrapping up here, Andre and I both appreciate the opportunity to share the updates this afternoon, and I know Mary will jump in here in just a few minutes. I did mention earlier, there is one remaining item to be completed as part of the compensation audit action plan. That is us engaging all of our employees over the next couple of months to review and update their job descriptions. And our commitment is to have that work done by June 30th. In the meantime, we are on the agenda for the March 11th board meeting, where similar to this presentation, Andre, Mary, and I will let the board know about the work that's being completed in that September to December timeframe last year. So with that, Mayor Vasquez, this concludes our report, and Andre and I, as well as our teams, are here and available to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you so very much. And I just wanted to check with Mary Kay to see if you have any comments.
Just to quickly say that I did look at the 11 action items. They were all completed and satisfied the corrective action steps required up till December 31st. Great job so far. Really, really impressed and pleased to see it moving along. And the last task is going to be a large task that I will be really excited to see happen. And I think it will just, bring more improvement and success to Sandag. So everything was great. And, just really congratulations to the hard work that they've done. So
thank you so very much. And so I just wanted to thank Melissa and Andre and Mary for presenting this report. So I'd like to check in with Francesca to see if we have any public comments.
Thank you, Chair. I don't see any hands from the public.
And now let's open this up for discussion. Do we have any questions or comments from the committee members? And so I'm looking for raised hands and hands that I can see. And as I do not see any hands at this, oh, wait, I do see a hand. I'll turn this over to Stuart.
Just one quick question. Well, actually, first, I just want to back up and say, really kind of a congratulations and appreciation to everybody. I think, we all know that a couple of years ago when this audit first came out, there was, let's say, just a wide range of views about various items. And it's great to see everybody come together and really comprehensively, and as Melissa described very thoroughly, work through all the remediation steps. And so I really think everybody should feel good about that. The one question I had relates to the acknowledgement, the attachment 8. I thought it was a little bit curious that the acknowledgement is stated as acknowledging that the employee has received access to the document, not necessarily that they've reviewed it. Just, curious about that sort of structure. And then secondly, I'm curious if this acknowledgement is something that's intended to be done on an annual basis or only when there are changes to policy. Somebody could address those. Thanks.
Yeah, Stuart, maybe I can address that related to the accounting department. So I will definitely look at the acknowledgement form. We had a group session to ensure that everybody reviewed the policies and procedures and they are comfortable with them. And so if the form needs to be addressed, I'll certainly make changes to that. And secondly, this is something that we will be doing if there's a new person coming on to the department. as well as an annual, just as a reminder for the rest of the team. So it is something that we have put into our accounting policies and procedures in our calendar. And so we will be reviewing it at least on an annual basis and whenever there's a new employee.
Thank you so much. No more questions, Mayor. Thank you.
And so I'm checking to see if we have any additional questions, and I do not see any hands at this time. I just would like to reconfirm.
Mayor Vasquez,
this-
Bob does have his hand. Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you,
I'll turn
Mary.
this over to Bob.
Thank you, Mayor. And I really don't have any questions other than I wanted to make a comment about this process, about how I think it has impacted other processes, the hotline report that we just got told about today, the current P-card audit that's coming up that we're going to be talking about. Because I, along with Stuart, remember this very first audit and the differing opinions that had come out of this. But it is really, and my comments directed towards Melissa and Andre in particular. Thank you very much. It's as a former auditor myself, it's nice to see when management and the audit staff are working together to improve the agency. And so I just wanted to tell you all thank you. And I can see that as we have other things coming up, that it's carrying over. And so continue that good work. And that's all I wanted to say, Mary Beth.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you so very much. And at this time, I do not see any additional hands. And so I would like to reconfirm that this will go to the board on March 11th. And so it will go to the board on March 11th. And again, thank you for providing this report and for everyone involved to bring it forward. Now I'll go on to item number 6. And item number 6 is the independent auditor results for the purchase card operational and system control review. And so I'll turn this over to Mary Kay.
Thank you, Mayor Vasquez. So this purchase card audit was auditor in charge was Lloyd Carter. However, Lloyd was temporarily out of the country, so we weren't sure if he was going to make it back in time to present. So we had Mike Ryan, who was also heavily involved in the audit, prepare to present this report, and he'll do a fine job. So we're going to let him go ahead and present the report. So I will turn this over to Mike, and then we will all three be available to answer questions afterwards. So Mike, are you ready?
Yep, I'm ready. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
Yeah, as Mary said, we finished our purchase card operational and system control review. Can we go to the next slide, please? So we looked at purchase card transactions from July 1st, 2017 through June 30th of 2021. Our overall objective of this review was to look at Sandag's management of purchase cards, review their operational processes, system controls to ensure policies are consistent with the federal and state regulations, verify controls are sufficient and consist of supporting documentation and other relevant data, and assess Sandag's ability to track and obtain sufficient documentation and keep adequate records of the process and control that support adherence to policies and procedures. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we had 4 findings. Our first finding was that the auditors found that there was inadequate procurement card policies, procedures, and lacking system controls. To clarify, when we say procurement card, we're always talking about the policy, because the policy was titled procurement card policy. And so when we say purchase cards, we're talking about the actual cards themselves or any transaction, if that makes sense. So the procurement card policy does not address any of the following: the delegation of signature authority, email approvals of transaction logs, and payments through alternative payment service providers. Think of like PayPal or things like that. We also noted that there was the training on the procurement card policy was quite minimal, and we found that personal charges can remain undetected. Next slide, please. Another thing we found was a large amount of weekend and holiday transactions. Transactions that occur on weekends and holidays aren't necessarily disallowed, but they're high risk because they occur on non-working days. So we took a sample of 123 weekend transactions and 41 holiday transactions. And in those combined samples, we found 18 transactions were missing one or more forms of proper support. 12 transactions were unallowable based on the policy, with the majority of them occurring at San Diego area restaurants. And we've had 4 transactions that had proper support, but could be considered unreasonable due to either the cost or the reasoning behind it, but they weren't explicitly disallowed. So there were 4 recommendations for the first finding. The first recommendation is that we recommend that any delegates who approve purchases on transactions log receive training on the procurement card policy and approval responsibilities. We recommend that the procurement card policy prohibit the approval of transaction logs by email or mandate that all supporting documentation be available digitally to the approver. The policy could allow approvers to designate a permanent alternate approver or temporary delegate who is trained on the policy and approver responsibilities to review and sign transaction logs if necessary. We recommend that the finance department develop a training session for the SANDAG procurement card policy. A session could include examples of improper use of purchase cards to make the training more relevant and comprehensible to the cardholder. And these sessions can be recorded and viewed at the card. So if a cardholder wants to look at it again for their convenience. And our last recommendation is that we recommend that the finance department develop a policy on SANDAG's use of popular merchant accounts such as Amazon for business purposes, and to reduce the number of these accounts to the lowest possible number. The finance department may also consider establishing corporate accounts with some of these popular merchants through which all SANDAG businesses purchase are funneled in order to reduce the chance of inadvertent or intentional personal purchases. Thank you. So the second finding we found was that the procurement card policy was not consistently followed. We took an initial sample of 44 transactions, and we found 3 cases in those 44 transactions where the transaction log was not signed by the approver. We noted many transactions where the receipt of goods purchased or other supporting documents were missing. Auditors found 34 transactions over the $3,500 limit for a single transaction, with 3 potential split purchases to avoid or circumvent that $3,500 transaction limit. We also noted that according to SANDAG's procurement card policy, the aggregate purchase amount should not exceed the micro purchase threshold, which was $3,500 until late June of 2021 for a vendor per fiscal year. So meaning the amount spent on a purchase card as a single vendor, at least based on that interpretation of the policy, should not be more than $3,500 in a single fiscal year. We found 106 instances among 61 vendors where more than $3,500 was spent in a single fiscal year. Mind you, if the SANDAGs were to keep this policy, that new threshold would be 10,000 as the micro purchase threshold was increased in late June of 2021. We recommend strict enforcement of procurement card policy provisions. The finance department should track noncompliance by cardholders and develop a mechanism for highlighting such noncompliance. A monthly listing provided to the executive director of cardholders who submitted their reconciliations after the deadline is an example of such a mechanism. Additionally, a quarterly report to the board of directors and or the audit committee of noncompliance would exhibit accountability and transparency. Our third finding is what auditors noted improper, questionable, and unallowable purchases. Auditors found charges at local restaurants and food establishments, which all combined totaled $69,130. By local, we mean restaurants and food establishments within the San Diego area. Auditors found purchases for gift cards, including 5 separate $100 gift cards that did not have a complete explanation on the transaction logs. We found 29 transactions out of a sample of 369 for utilities, memberships, and other unallowable purchases. And in the report, we broke down how this was spent based on funds, but SANDAG held a staff retreat at a downtown San Diego hotel in December 2019, and these costs were charged to federal, state, and local funds. Next slide, please. We had a lot of recommendations for this finding. The first was the finance department should disallow the practices of purchasing meals at local establishments immediately, and the procurement card policy should be revised to explicitly reflect this prohibition. The finance department should tally all improper purchase card charges and seek reimbursement of this amount from the responsible cardholder. Third, SANDAG should refrain from issuing purchase cards to individual cardholders and instead reimburse them for expenses. In cases where employees are unwilling or unable to bear the financial burden of paying with their personal funds for work-related purchases, SANDAG can advance funds or pay through a departmental card. Next slide, please. Our fourth recommendation for this finding was that the finance department should evaluate any tax compliant issues that resulted from the purchase of meals for employees and board members at local restaurants. This entails tallying payments for select individuals, making any required reports to the IRS. Individual recipients of paid meals should also be notified and advised to consult with their own tax advisors if they were not SANDAG employees. The general counsel should evaluate, or fifth recommendation, sorry, is the general counsel should evaluate the implications of paid meals to board members and any inadvertent violations of the FPPC regulations and necessary filing. Covered individuals should be notified and also consult with their own ethics advisors. And the sixth recommendation is the procurement card policy should be amended to explicitly prohibit the purchase of gift cards. Last slide of recommendations for this finding. Thank you. The CFO should examine this transaction and contact the relevant funding agencies for advice. SANDAG should reimburse any funds that are deemed unallowable. The eighth recommendation is the board of directors may want to consider creating a board policy that provides allowability of some of these transactions with the understanding of the risk associated with allowing for activity that is considered unallowable by federal and state funding agencies. And our final recommendation for this finding is that a monthly or quarterly listing provided to the audit committee or the board of the directors of cardholders and transaction by users would be a good system control to put in place to encourage adherence to the policy and exhibit accountability and transparency. And our last finding was auditors noted purchases of both hardware and software using purchase cards. We want to emphasize that though this is not explicitly disallowed by SANDAG policy, hardware and software purchases pose a risk of violating the 3,500 single transaction limit, as hardware and software can be expensive. We know that in March of 2020, over 178,000 was spent over the course of 4 transactions using purchase cards for laptops and devices necessary for employees to work from home. And we also found multiple other examples where we listed 3 in the report of software and hardware purchases exceeding the 3,500 limit. We want to note that other government agencies prohibit the use of purchase cards for hardware and software purchases for the reasons such as this. And our recommendation for this finding is that SANDAG should revise its procurement card policy to limit or restrict payment for information technology hardware or software to the lowest level possible. SANDAG management provided a response to the OIPA and they are in agreement with the audit finding. Management's response and a prepared corrective action plan addressing the report recommendations are attached to the report. The OIPA will work with management to ensure that the corrective action plan is reviewed on a quarterly basis and actions noted are implemented. And with that, are there any questions?
Thank you so very much, Mike, for the report. And so now it is our opportunity to discuss and ask questions. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to check in with the entire board. And so I'll start with Stuart. Do you have any questions or comments?
Thank you. Yeah, actually, there were just a couple of things. First, thanks, Mike and team for the very comprehensive report as well, particularly the clarity of the communication. I mean, there's a lot of complexity here, and I think you guys really boiled it down into very clear communication. Also very appreciative that management has accepted all the recommendations, and particularly that you've got a pretty fairly rapid implementation targets. And I know, Andre, you and your team are busy, so it's great to see that you've got tight timeframes on this. I've been a CFO of a couple of organizations, and I've wrestled with a lot of these issues myself. I guess one question is that, and I don't recall if it was specifically broken out in the data, but it was alluded to, just the notion of the need for the P cards themselves. I mean, I presume that if somebody makes a charge to a P card, they've got to provide all of the documentation and backup as one would if you'd charged it to a personal credit card and were seeking reimbursement, right? So the documentation burden is no different, whether it's a P card or not. And so in that vein, to the point of one of the suggestions, I'm wondering, Andre, if you could speak to how often is it the case that someone literally needs a P card because their personal credit card wouldn't support the amounts that their job might be requiring them to be charging?
Yeah, I appreciate that question, Stuart. So, I mean, just to maybe lay the landscape here. So P cards in general, I think the audit report shows there's about 600,000 on average annually spent on the P cards. And so, you know, looking at our total budget of 1.2 billion over that time period. So it's about 0.5% of the total expenditures, you know, about 80% is done by, you know, ACH and wire, 20% is, you know, basically by checks. And so it's a very small portion. And so I think on average, we'd say there's 16 outstanding right now. On average has been 17 to 20 over the time period during the audit. On average, you know, it's about $10,000, the credit line. And I think in general, the biggest, you know, expenses are, you know, kind of the travel expenses that need to happen. And I'd say, you know, some of the IT spend that needs to happen right away. And so, you know, I don't think it's reasonable to expect, you know, let's say Tessa, who's the executive secretary here, to, you know, buy all the travel on her personal card and get reimbursed, right? So it's very limited amount of scope that we charge. And I, you know, after, you know, this audit, we're probably going to narrow it a little bit, you know, further. So it's not that it's, we would prefer for, you know, individuals to spend on their own cards and then get reimbursed through the normal course of business. But the ones that we have are kind of more of an exception basis. But again, with this audit, I think that we'll probably narrow that scope a little further too.
Yeah, I appreciate that because again, you know, in the context of your budget, I get you, this is not a meaningful percentage. It's to some degree, it's sort of a perception issue. And it's also, you know, as identified in the report, there can be instances where it's a little bit more difficult to separate the personal from the business. But I hear you in terms of the magnitude. I guess the other question I had, and maybe this is for Mike or Mary and your team, there may be some strict federal or state regulations I'm not aware of, but with regard to your concept of barring expenditure at local restaurants and things of that nature, don't you foresee that there actually are instances where there are legitimate expenditures on a local basis? I mean, for example, if somebody were being recruited to the agency and you wanted to take them out to lunch, I don't know that you would say that would be improper if that's otherwise barred, or as Asan was alluding to, situations where there are visiting dignitaries where perhaps you might also want to have a lunch. Is the notion of using a P card for a local restaurant totally not permissible in your view?
I'll answer that question. In some of those examples you provided, they wouldn't, like a potential candidate, probably not a good idea to use any type of public funding to buy that individual a lunch. But there are circumstances, such as the second example, where, you know, Asan may have a business need and want to take somebody out. And that could be reasonable. It should be supported. So the one thing we want to make sure here that the policy that's incorporated into the policy is that, one, there's sufficient support, and that support should include what the agenda. So what was the discussion and what was the matter? What was the need, right? You know, was there a need to have a lunch or dinner or go out? Who was there? So who was in attendance is very important. And then, is it reasonable in the eye of the public, right? We want to make sure that we're not spending, you know, going to a fancy place and overly spending, because again, it's the eye of the public, right? It's always material in fact and appearance, right? So we want to make sure that it's appropriate and reasonable. Another thing we want to make sure we do is we have the business need defined, and how that helps us is we want to make sure that we don't run into a potential area where there could be a Brown Act violation. Like there was a discussion and we don't know what that discussion was. We don't know what the matter was about, but we know that there were possibly board members in attendance. And so what was that discussion? If that's lacking, then there's this concern that there could be a Brown Act violation. So I think there are incidences where it is appropriate completely, but just, in the policy, we need to put those guidelines in there when it would be appropriate and what type of documentation should exist if it does occur. Another really good thing in speaking with other special districts is they don't really use a purchase card for those items. There's typically, for the executive level individuals such as Asan, there would be an executive credit card that is, there's a budget to that's approved by the board. It's done in advance. It's done at the, a budgeted amount at the beginning of the year, and it is for those specific needs. There's also a budgeted amount, again, at the executive level for like employee appreciation matters. Around gift cards and stuff. And then the very important thing is, how are those gift cards, the custody of those? So like, are they lost them? And when they're used, who is it? Can't not happen. It just, and assure that there's a possible report that comes to the committee, either the audit committee or the board, on a quarterly basis that shows the spending and what it was spent on. So that's completely transparent, being completely accountable. And I think at that point in time, that it would be seen as appropriate.
Thanks. And I appreciate the elaboration, even though we missed a little bit of what you said in the technology there. Cut you off, but I think we got the vast preponderance of it. And maybe I misread the document, but my reading of it was that there was kind of like a hard prohibition on using cards at local restaurants. But your explanation makes perfect sense. And I just want to make sure that we weren't overreaching and not letting the agency do things that would be viewed as reasonable and important for doing their business by not being able to have a charge at a local restaurant. So appreciate the clarification, and no more questions. Thank you, Mayor.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so very much. I'd like to check in with Agnes to see if you have any questions or comments.
Yes, I think a lot of my comments that Stuart has already brought up. First of all, I do want to thank Mary, the team, and management working closely on this one, because I mean, this audit is very thorough, and it did highlight, there are areas, and quite a few of them, that need improvement, right? So I really do appreciate everybody, coming together, willing to work together to, make things better. One thing I think is really important too is, to focus on staff training, because if the staff are properly trained and know that, what are acceptable, what's the standard, and follow it, and know that if there are issues, who they can go to escalate the issue. Because I know sometimes it might be a little bit uncomfortable for staff to challenge a very senior executives as charges, right? So we need to set that kind of a culture and say, well, this is the process. This is, what you expected of you. If you have issues, and who do you go to escalate? I mean, I think that kind of training and process and culture is really important, because, we do rely on our staff to do their job, to, put in this really good internal control. So I'm hopefully that, this audit will help establish that kind of training and culture. Another thing I want to also mention too, because this is a public agency, And sometimes the senior executives definitely in the limelight a lot more. And as a way to, just make sure we establish the transparency and make sure there's a proper review and approval. I don't know, like, for example, I assume someone maybe like Andre will review some of Hassan's maybe charges on hospitality. I agree that, those kind of expenses, a lot of time they have very legitimate business use, but it's still good to have another person to, review it on a regular basis, just to, as a way of checks and balances, right? So these are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. And I will check in with Bob, followed by San Marcos Councilmember Ed Musgrove. So I'll turn this over to you, Bob.
All right, thank you, Mayor. This is just a point of clarification for myself. So it's kind of addressed to either Mary or Michael. And thank you, Michael, for the good presentation that you made. Very clear. When I was reading the report and when the section on the limitations, the $3,500 limitation, I think, and you mentioned the split transactions, things of that nature. You also mentioned that the limitation has been increased to $10,000, but that was kind of outside, if I was understanding correctly, that was outside the scope of your audit, but you still went ahead and even compared some of those transactions to that $10,000 limit. And I want to make sure I understand. You still found, I think it was about 90 transactions that would have exceeded that $10,000 limit. Is that correct?
Yeah, let me clarify that. So there's the individual transaction limit, just one for the one transaction, that still remains the same at 3,500. So for an individual transaction, it's not supposed to go over 3,500. But there is a policy in the procurement card policy. I want to pull it up and make sure I get it exactly, because yeah, it is a little confusing. Let me find it in the actual report. So the wording of the policy is the aggregate purchase amount should not exceed the micro purchase threshold for a vendor per fiscal year. Purchase aggregating more than the micro purchase threshold in a fiscal year require a procurement via contracts in the CMS. So we took that to interpret that you can't spend at a single vendor with a purchase card in a single fiscal year for more than 3,500, because the micro purchase threshold up until late June of 2021 was 3,500. So, and then in late June 2021, they went to the federal rate, which was 10,000. So we wanted to include that in there just to show that it's still something that's going to need to be corrected, even though the micro purchase threshold and therefore that policy threshold did increase.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That's all that I had.
Thank you so very much. And Councilmember Musgrove.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm just curious to know if Sandag in general and the auditor looked regionally for other large agencies like the county, city of San Diego, where they have blanket purchase agreements already in place, and Sandag could simply piggyback off those. A little bit disturbing the amount of money we spent on the laptops, and I understand the necessity for it, but when we went into six figures on a P card, I know most of the agencies have agreements with vendors for laptops and equipment, and you are allowed to piggyback off somebody else's BPA as long as it's been vetted, and these are vetted, otherwise it wouldn't be a BPA. Was that explored at all, or can that be something that is incorporated into
yes,
our process? I'm finished. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Musgrove. Yes, that's exactly why we had it as a separate finding, because there are, we as a public agency do have that same opportunity to piggyback and have these blanket orders and such. But I believe that they do other government agencies do.
Can I interject and suggest, if it's permissible, Mary, you might want to just go audio only because your connection's pretty spotty. I don't know if that, Amberlynn, that's legally permissible.
Yeah, it is. Does it help? How is that, Stuart?
I think
Is
that
that-
would be better.
Is that better?
Yes.
Yes, that's
Okay.
better.
Much better.
Okay, thank you. So as I was saying, yes, that is definitely, Councilmember Musgrove. What we also looked at and considered is they do have the opportunity, which is why we had that as a separate finding. They do have the opportunity to have those blankets, and they could, as well as a public agency, piggyback on other blankets. So we did find that to be, concerning. And I'm sure that as they move through their policy and create and update their policy, that they will have those conditions in there as well.
Great. Thanks very much, Mary.
Mm-hmm. You're welcome.
Thank you so much. And as we know, this particular item was a discussion item with possible action. I'd like to check in with Mary to see what kind of action is possible, but also following that, I'll check in to see if we would like to take action. So I'll turn this over to Mary.
Thank you, Mayor. I believe the action is to, and Amberlyn can help me with this if possible, is to accept the report and to move it forward to the board. And this report is scheduled actually to be heard at the board meeting on March 11th.
Thank you so very much. And with that action, does that require a vote?
Yes, it would.
Thank you. And so with that said, and the action that's on the table, do we have a motion?
I would motion acceptance of the report and moving it on to the board of directors for their consideration and acceptance.
Thank you so very much. So we have a motion, and do we have a second?
I second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. I'd like to ask Francesca to call the vote.
Thank you, Chair. I did want to just also give an opportunity for the public to comment on this item. I don't think we did that at the top of the item.
Thank you so very much. And do we have any public comments regarding this item?
Thank you. I don't see any hands.
Thank you very much. And as we do not have any public comments, we have a motion and a second on the floor. Francesca, please call the roll.
Thank you very much. Board Member Vice Chair Vasquez.
Yes.
Thank you. Board Member Musgrove.
Yes, thank you.
Public Member Agnes Wong Nickerson.
Yes.
Public Member Stuart Halpern.
Yes.
And Public Member Bob Monson.
Yes.
Thank you very much. And that item does pass unanimously.
Thank you so very much. We are near the end of our meeting. And now I'd like to check in to see if we have any additional public comments. Francesca, please let us know if we have any additional public comments.
Thank you, Chair. I don't see any hands.
Thank you. And do we have any additional member comments?
If I could, Mayor, just for a second.
Yes, I'll turn it over to Councilmember Musgrove.
Yes, I would just like to thank Mary Kay. She's very attentive at the board meetings, and I know it's a quick turnaround time for the audit committee, but always gives good information out on both sides and is willing to put in the hard work and effort. So my personal and professional thanks to Mary Kay.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I see that Agnes, you have comments.
Yeah, I just have a quick question. You know, in the beginning of the meeting, we have a public comment from someone to ask the audit committee to look at the affordable housing number. So when we have requests like this, what's the process to, follow up on that kind of comments? Can someone talk about that?
I can discuss that, Agnes. So we do typically, if a comment comes of something that I'm already looking at, I kind of incorporate that comment into what I'm looking at and maybe expand my scope. I'm glad you brought that up, because the best way for me to consider something that is not on the audit plan is for someone to file a complaint on the fraud, waste, and abuse hotline. And then that at least gets it properly documented and allows me to look at the evidence or the proposals or concerns that are being provided and determine if resources could be reallocated for those matters. So that's a really good point. It is caught in the minutes, but really, you know, taking resources and moving it from one point to another really has to be done with a more formal written, you know, explanation and some type of evidence that would warrant me moving resources from one area to another area.
Okay, so does it mean that someone will need to let that public member know if she wants to pursue this further? This is what she needs to do?
Yes, yes. In fact, I probably have her contact information. So if appropriate, I can reach out and encourage her to go to my the website and look at this process around fraud, waste, and abuse. But that's a great point. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And as I do not see any additional hands up for member comments, the next audit committee meeting will be held on Friday, March 25th at 12:30 p.m. This meeting is now adjourned.
Thank you, everybody.
See you all. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.